before I even get into Mercaris and the topic on today, I just want to congratulate everybody. I thought like all of your mini pitches were really good, and it's amazing. As each of you went through your companies, like they all seem very relevant in today's environment. You know, I know it's a tough macroeconomic environment and a lot of uncertainty, and it's just, you know, crazy times. But I think without exception, you guys all have really good, viable business ideas for the times that we're in today. So yeah, I love it. And congratulations, because it took me a decade longer than any of you to get to the entrepreneurship. So you're like early start. Good job. So let's see, before I jump into the presentation, I can see you all on the screen. So can you just, everyone who is considers themselves B2B, can you just raise your hand? Give me a show. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3. All right, and then is everyone else B2C? Just raise your hand if you're B2C. Okay, okay. Anyone else not sure yet or open to thinking? Okay, okay. All right, that's really good. And then next question for you is, how many of you have got some early revenue already from a customer or customers? All right, also good. Okay, and the rest are pre-revenue. Okay, that just helps me get an idea of, oh, last question. Any of you looking to find outside funding, whether it's venture capital or bank loans or anything else? Okay. And then the rest of you, I'm just going to make an assumption, but tell me if it's not that you're going to, you know, fund out, you know, out of your own customer revenue or self-fund, that sort of thing. All right. Okay. Okay. That's good to know too, because I will try to tailor some of my remarks for that. So a little bit about Mercaris. Well, a little bit about me. I am one of the co-founders of Mercaris. There are 2 of us. And we've been around since I actually incorporated the company back in 2012, but it took my co-founder and I a while to work up the nerve to quit our day job. So we have had paying customers since late 2014. And Mercaris exists to do 2 really simple things on the surface. We are a market data service, subscription-based on the one hand. We're also an online trading platform, think eBay, for a particular subset of the food and ag supply chain that is organic and non-GMO commodities and ingredients. So we're a place you can follow the price of, you know, organic corn or buy and sell organic wheat online. Our customers range, you know, across the supply chain. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my slide presentation, but just to give you an idea of where we are. Let me see if I can take presenter mode over and just show you a few slides. And I want to keep this pretty conversational so that, excuse me, so that you now when you cough, you're like, oh my gosh, do I have COVID? Now, I want to keep it conversational so that we have time for just Q&A throughout. So I'll keep an eye on the chat bar as I'm presenting, and just feel free to pop up. And then same thing if you want to, you know, if you've got anything throughout, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some discussion and Q&A also. So I think we've got like another 45 minutes or so. Is that right, Holly? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me see. Where I have not actually, contrary to everyone else, I have not been using Zoom as much. I've been using Blue Jeans and a couple of other applications. So let me just see. I might ask for a little technical help on sharing my screen. It is, and I think the presenter might have to pass, I don't know, some of the other presenters have to pass presenter mode over.
So you are a co-host, so you should have the ability to screen share.
Okay, okay.
And at the bottom of your screen, there's a menu with share screen.
Oh, there we go.
Ah.
All right.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, what I have is too many windows open, but all right. So, actually, I'm jumping to the middle. All right, so I'm going to share my story of Mercaris just to give you hopefully some, not just inspiration, but you might find some lessons that you can apply to your own company. So, as I said, Mercaris is a data service and trading platform for organic, non-GMO, what's called identity preserved ag commodities in the business. Here's the inspiration. You know, I didn't start Mercaris until I was in my early 30s. it was after a career of working in supply chain and commodities markets. So I had the expertise working for other people, and then had just felt this natural restlessness, like I'm sure a lot of you do, for seeing something that didn't exist that could. And my inspiration was really just walking down the grocery store aisles. And, I thought about how the grocery store looked back in the, 40, 50 years ago, where you would just buy, milk. And now, as we've gotten, into the 90s and into today, I mean, now you walk down the aisle and you can do this with milk, you can do this with eggs, you can do this with coffee, you pretty much pick a food category, and you see the segmentation in the market. So now you're not just buying milk, but you're buying, organic milk or grass-fed milk or pea protein milk. And my background as an economist led me to believe that these were all still commodities. They were all still markets that were subject to the rules, the laws of supply and demand, and prices fluctuated wildly. But the tools, the traditional tools for risk management and just understanding what was going on in the market were not available for these commodities. Like, just because you have a lot of information about milk doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the price of, input costs for organic milk or, pea protein milk. And so I thought, well, why not stand up a company to do this? So at the very beginning, my co-founder and I, we had worked together at another startup commodities exchange in Chicago. And so we knew we worked well together. We knew we had similar values. We had complementary skill sets. He was the technologist and I was the biz dev, kind of did everything else. And so we teamed up to co-found this company. And we spent about a year talking to potential customers. So basically this was the testing the hypothesis part of this. Hey, we have a feeling that it's hard for you to do your job because who knows how much organic corn is going to cost, tomorrow, or, is it hard finding buyers when you're a seller and vice versa. And so we went in with a couple of assumptions that I love the phrase, you should have strong opinions loosely held, because we went in with very strong opinions. We think there's a problem here. But then we were willing for people to tell us, no, absolutely not, or yes, but, or, here's our understanding of what what you're trying to provide. And so we just spent a lot of time in conversation. I had the luxury of doing that. Not everybody has that. I was working as a consultant for USDA at the time. And so I got to set my own schedule. I didn't have kids at the time. I was married and my husband had a job. I mention all this to say, because sometimes there's a mythology around entrepreneurs that, like, oh, you just go out there and you live in your car and you eat ramen noodles and, and then you create this amazing thing and then you're, it's off to the races. And I will say that, life is messier than that. And, sometimes you got to cobble together like multiple income streams to try and do this. Sometimes you're doing it part-time because you got to, I love living indoors. It's just an amazing thing. And, that can be part of the entrepreneurial story too. So I was a little intimidated, I have to admit it, that the story of like the sort of, genius in a hoodie that just like raises all this money and starts. And that the more I talk to other my fellow entrepreneurs, the more I realize that is an anomaly. That is not even the norm. So, but I did spend a year doing a lot of market research, and then we were ready to launch the following year. So we threw up a website. It was just a landing page. There was nothing else there. You couldn't buy anything. It just had the company name and our original logo, which we since changed. And then the other thing it had, though, I had a white paper, because during the time I was talking to customers, I was meticulously taking notes, and I actually turned it into a white paper, kind of an academic piece. It was way too long. It was like 80 pages. And I laugh when I think of that now. But in a way, it was my minimum viable product. It laid out the case for Mercaris and what was needed. And that's actually what I used to help. Not that I sent the whole 80-page paper to a bunch of venture capitalists, but it's what I kind of, I had become an expert on the topic of what I wanted to do. And we made the decision early on to go after venture capital. There are many paths up the mountain. Venture capital is good if you need to scale really fast, faster than you could do by just kind of letting the business grow, pardon the pun, organically. If you've got some technology that you really need to protect, and you maybe even need the resources to help you with, protecting it, venture capital can be helpful to doing that. And if you just have you just know it's not a kind of friends and family or dipping into your own cash reserves or credit card or that sort of thing, venture capital can be happy, a happy medium for getting that type of business off the ground. That said, venture capital comes with a whole lot of caveats and risks. So stop me if I'm repeating what you already know, but it's not easy to raise. It distracts you from the actual business of building your business, because you've got to go out there and pitch to VCs and spend a lot of time, making them comfortable with what you're doing. So that can be difficult. It's also, there's some biases built in. It's hard. It can be harder for women and people of color to raise venture capital for a whole lot of reasons. That said, if that's what you need to do to build your business, you should lean into it full throttle and do it, because it can be done. And then it gives you a set of bosses. So venture capital means you get a bunch of money and you got to scale quickly. And now you've got, your board, your investors telling you have to scale quickly. So the times I've gotten into a little bit of dialogue and controversy with my investors is when I, as an entrepreneur, had a different opinion of how to build the business. Sometimes I was like, well, maybe we need to slow down and understand this phenomenon more, or I don't want to spend a ton of capital. I want to keep my burn low, even to achieve some stable growth at the expense of spending a bunch of money. Not all VCs take that point of view, so you have to ask some really good questions at the front. You want to find outside capital that has a similar view that you do to building the business, and your view will change over time too. And you want some VCs that are really backing you, that are in your corner. So, all right, I know this is not about VC funding, but I just thought I'd mention that. So back to Mercaris, the problem we were solving was that markets where data was pretty out of date. It was barely available at all, or a lot of times it was informal. It was like people picking up the phone in the rumor mill. And physical trading, again, was a lot of people on the phone buying and selling. So that's what we were aiming to overcome. And one second.
Kellee, I cannot see your screen. I just see dark. Does everybody else see it?
No okay. Screen. Huh.
I can see her
you
screen.
have to choose the application.
Okay. It says I'm screen sharing. Let me see.
I can see her screen just fine.
Okay.
Me too. Yeah.
Huh.
It says impediment IP.
Okay. So half can see it. There's more than one person that can't see it?
It's fine if it's me who can't see it.
Okay.
I just don't know if there are students who can't see it.
Okay. I'm getting messages that lots of people can see it. All right.
I'm
right.
very glad to hear that.
I'll act it out, Sarah. I'll just do
Thank
it
you.
now.
I appreciate that.
All right. So that was the problem we decided to solve. All right, so just very quickly, we produce a bunch of reports. If you ever get on a Bloomberg's terminal and look at some of the price data for stocks and bonds and asset classes, we do this something similar for corn, wheat, soybeans, dairy, cream, powdered milk, that sort of thing. And we look at some macroeconomic factors like trade volumes and supply and demand analysis and whatnot. On the trading side, our customers, if you ask them about our trading platform, they would tell you, oh, it's a way for us to buy wheat or sell soybeans. We would agree with that, but we would also say it's a source of price information. So trading for us doesn't make us a ton of money. It makes us a little bit. But every time someone buys a bushel of soybeans for $21.32 on our trading platform, we can push that data into our reports and we sell it. We charge a small transaction fee and then we sell it again as part of a report. So I don't want to belabor this. Here's some of our customers. Some of them are household names that you know. Some of them are the support system, the infrastructure behind the agricultural markets like Cargill and Schooler and whatnot. So it's a mix. I'll talk a little bit more about customers. So I'm going to get more into the customer portion of this. So we're B2B, but B2B is such a broad universe. So B2B for us can mean small family farms that buy data from us, or that we give data for free to because it's part of our mission. It's mainly our revenue is subscription based. So depending on the level of data that you access, you might be getting, like I said, for farms, we offer some very free monthly reports, all the way up to our top customers are paying us in the range of $40,000 a year for pretty much all the analysis we have. And subscription fees are about 80 to 85% of our revenue are subscription fees. The other remaining 15% is transaction fees from trading. So we charge a per bushel or per pound transaction fee every time a buyer and seller meet on the trading platform. and do a deal. All right. So I think the point of this slide was really, think through. I will just full disclosure, I am not an expert. I don't even consider myself an expert on B2B, but we are B2B, and so I have more familiarity with that. B2C is a whole different animal. And I say that just to say, for those of you that are B2C, there's just going to be some very different techniques you use for acquiring customers and growing your customer base than B2B. So just keep that in mind. I'm a little more familiar with B2B than B2C, but we can still have a conversation about B2C as well. So, all right, so who are our customers? And this is really a chance to think about who are your customers. We kind of group them into buckets, and we know their personas, from, your marketing classes, thinking it through the eyes of the customer. What is it what are their challenges? What's their day-to-day? A favorite question of ours is, before you pull up our reports and look at, the price report for organic wheat, what were you doing for 5 minutes before you pulled up our report? And what do you do the 5 minutes after you look at our report? And as a conversation starter, as you're doing customer research, what that does is, for the customers that are not, too terribly talkative, it gives them a concrete thing to talk about. And what we're trying to get at is, like, what problem are you solving? You're trying to work on something before you go pull up the Mercaris report. What is it? Is it, reports you got to get out to your team? Are you about to get on the phone with the supplier and make an order? We're trying to understand what your workflow is and what problem you're trying to solve. 5 minutes after is, what did you do with our product? So you got some information, or you did something, you interacted, engaged with us somehow, and then what was the action? What was the decision? What were you able to do or not able to do after looking at our products? So that is a very common hack that we use just to kind of get customers talking. What were you doing 5 minutes before you picked up our product or looked at our screen or read our report? And what were you doing 5 minutes after? What did you do 5 minutes after? And so for us, we break it down along where the customer sits on the supply chain. So farmers, that's growers, the grain handlers, they're often called millers or brokers, investors, consultants. Those are folks that don't touch the commodity at all, but their customers do. But it's, I think, really important for your customers to at least have a hypothesis of who your customers are and what you think they're doing, and be able to, express it pretty concisely. I'll pause there for just a second. Any, questions or observations? Anyone tried this segmenting their customers out?
So did you come up with these buckets before or after getting the sale?
We came up with them before. This is more of a finished product right here. They're finished, as much as any startup can be finished, but this is something fairly recent. So it's evolved, and I expect this will continue to evolve a bit. But we came up with the original idea before we really even had raised our first dollar of revenue. So while we've shifted the categories a bit, I still could have put up a slide similar to this with, what's new is, we didn't really look at investors and financial analysts as a customer at all. That's new. We started focusing on the growers, the merchandisers, and the CPG, the manufacturers. So it's evolved, it's flexible. The other thing is, if I were to make these green circles larger or smaller according to either revenue or engagement, whichever one, growers would be huge in terms of time they take from us, but really tiny in terms of revenue. When we started, we thought, oh my gosh, there's thousands of growers. They're going to be like our core customer base in terms of dollars in. Well, they're really small. Farmers, go figure, spend a lot of time out in fields and not waiting by the phone for you to talk to them. So they're really hard to acquire one by one. And they're really expensive to acquire one by one, and then they don't pay you very much money. So while they are still a core stakeholder group, what's changed is we actually give them a ton of stuff for free, because it's just not worth our time to hunt them down for $30 worth of revenue a month. Not when there are banks that are willing to pay $40,000 a year. So we gather a lot of information from them. We give them a lot of information. It's part of our mission, and they underpin the entire ag sector. So we need them. But they're not a big source of revenue, and that is a surprise. We didn't, maybe in retrospect we should have known that, but that has changed. So really good questions. All right, so the first thing we did was, I'll just take a little not really a detour, but to talk about the vaunted product market fit. I'm sure you've all had conversations about this. And product market fit, for all the mythology around it, I view it as two pretty simple things, which is, will some number of people or businesses pay you money for your product? Do they get some value out of it? And the sort of flip side is, can you provide that service for less money than it costs you to build it? I add that second one because if you don't raise outside money, then the second one becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. For the person who's doing nails, I mean, if it costs you more every time you get a set of nails into a customer's hands than you are making from the customer, then the business just won't last very long. And without outside money, that becomes obvious pretty quickly. But as your business grows, whether you have outside money or not, or whether you get outside money, sometimes that can be obscured. There's plenty of business case studies out there about companies that offered, discounts or signups. Groupon is like a great example too, where, people will pay once and you get like this initial rush of revenue in, but ultimately you can't just continue acquiring customers at that cost. And, just the model itself falls apart. You end up not making as much money as you spend. But it can be obscured if you get revenue up front and then are not accurately tracking whether, how and whether it goes out the door. So, so those two things are really important. And I think that, again, venture capital can obscure a product market fit. And so those of us in that realm have to really pay attention to that. But I think, but on the other hand, I think it's really good to get people to, pay something. Anyone who's, if you've ever had the kitchen table conversations with family or friends, and you're like, hey, I've got this idea. And mostly, I don't know, I feel very fortunate that I have really supportive family and friends. They're like, yes, this sounds amazing. Let's do it. But the rubber meets the road when you're like, okay, and how much would you pay for that? Will you, put down your credit card? That's when you really understand if you have product market fit. So that's always a reality check. And then I guess I'll also say, will enough people pay? So are you trying to create a lifestyle business where you're able to, pay yourself a good salary, employ, a few people or even a lot of people and pay their salaries? And that's the goal, is to run this business, kind of in perpetuity. Are you looking to create a business that is acquired? That's another part of the venture capital model. There's only two ways out. Well, there's three ways out of venture capital. You either go out of business one day, or you IPO, or you're acquired by someone else. Mostly those investors don't want to be paid back. They want one of those three things to happen. So think about like what you personally, as an entrepreneur, what your goal is. And that will also help you answer the questions of product market fit, because again, the number of people that will pay you for your product or service is different if you're running a lifestyle business versus a venture capital business. All right. Okay, so early customer acquisition. There's the saying, I think I can't remember the founder, if it's LinkedIn or one of I should have looked that up, but the idea that you can do things that don't scale at first. So that means like very intensive customer service, sitting down face to face or via Zoom at this point with customers and spending a lot of time with them on an individual basis. It means even though you might have a lot of technology at your disposal, like we have a lot of technology to match buyers and sellers, but we're not averse, hadn't been in the early days and still aren't today, to picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, guess what? We're doing a brand new auction for organic cream. It's the first one we're doing. There's no technology that magically gets people to use it. A lot of it is like shoe leather. And it's sitting and talking to people and saying, hey, we've got the auction up and running. Just calling to let you know you can go ahead and log in. That does not scale when you're talking about dozens or thousands or even dozens of people. But at the beginning, it's what we needed to do and still need to do sometimes to get our auctions to work. So things that don't scale, as long as you're learning lessons from those things, are absolutely a very credible way to get customers in and get some revenue in the door. Number two is make your first customers your partners if you can, if this applies to you. So we have always been good at getting customers to sometimes prepay for things that they want. And again, this is B2B, but this, this does work for B2C. I mean, this is anybody who's ever done a crowdfunding campaign knows that you can make your first customers your partners. They're paying you money up front because they think this is a really cool concept that you're developing, and it's not ready yet, but they'll get first option, first dibs on the first, the first thing that you make. So getting your first customers as partners helps for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes it's revenue up front. Two, you're building something in consultation with someone who's going to use it, in theory. And so understanding the features and the challenges and whatnot that they have is really important. Now, everything I say comes with a caveat, which is sometimes customers don't know exactly what they want. And the example I've heard given before is, like, if you said to someone, transport yourself back 20 years, do you want a cell phone? They'd be like, what? I don't know. I guess maybe that might be interesting. There's no way they're going to be able to answer that question. But you ask the question instead, you're stuck in traffic and you can't get to your kids. Would you like a way to communicate with your family? That's the question that people can answer. A lot of times, if your vision is big enough, they may not be able to answer the precise question. You really want to get at problems rather than solutions. What problems do you have rather than what solutions do you want? Because it's your job to build the solutions, as long as you really understand the problems. And sometimes customers can lead you down the wrong path, right? Like you talk to one customer who's like, oh, I want it to be blue. Well, that might be a very important logical business need for them, but is the next customer going to want the thing that's blue, or do they have a different need? So it's better to understand the needs, and then you can sort of execute on whether it's blue or red or green or round or square, that sort of thing. So customers as partners is critical, but also it can still sometimes lead you down the wrong path if you're not careful. And then, come off with a hypothesis. Come up with a hypothesis and then test it fast. This is the vaunted fail fast advice. And I had trouble with this for a long time because I don't like failure. And I also felt like, was I going to be allowed to fail? When you're doing B2B, even when you're doing B2C, people get, pretty pissed off pretty fast, and then they won't come back and trust you. So I would say test it and fail fast, but with some safety rails. Maybe test amongst a small pool of customers. Maybe test amongst some trusted customers who are more partners than just sort of transactional in nature. Those are some things that you can do to kind of protect yourself and your business's reputation. You don't want to roll out some new feature to, dozens or thousands of people, and then it doesn't work very well, or they don't like it, and then you kind of lose a bit of credibility. So come up with the hypotheses, test them, but test them amongst focus group it kind of thing. And this also kind of goes hand in hand with minimum viable product. I always tell myself that each letter is important. And, the minimum is important because, of course, you don't want to spend years of your life and lots of dollars and people's time coming up with something that's super fancy and answers all the questions, because inevitably there are going to be more questions and more things you want to build. And you don't want to build yourself into a corner where that's it. Your product is not flexible and you can't, taking apart and starting all over again would be really hard. So the minimum is still, you want a prototype, you want, vaporware, you want a mock-up on a screen that they can interact with, but you don't necessarily want to build it all the way out. It's like doing a pattern for a dress without, sewing the dress itself. And then the viable is important too, because for us, we're asking companies like General Mills to use our data to make millions of dollars of purchasing decisions. So the viability part has got to be right. Like, we cannot give them inaccurate information, or just the entire business falls apart. This gets back to, customer trust. But viable still doesn't mean it's in its fullest form. So like our very first product was like, man, there used to be zero data at all organic corn. We can give you data, once a quarter on it. It'll be good data, but it's only going to be once a quarter. And then as we got the ball rolling, we said, well, now we can do it once a month, and now we can do it once a week, and now we can do it daily. So it was viable, but it wasn't in its, it wasn't perfect yet in terms of absolutely meeting every single customer need. It's a good sign, by the way, when customers are like, this is amazing, I've never had it before. Like, all of a sudden they have something they've never had. And so they're like, oh, but now can you do this? Now can you do this? Now can you do this? That's really a good sign, actually. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It means that you've met a need and they want more of it. So, and then obviously the product, because otherwise what do you have to make money on? And then finally, I would say, and again, for those of you that raise outside capital, it's really tempting to go ahead and spend money on customer acquisition up front, because there's all these statistics that VCs love to see, which is like user growth. Like, oh my gosh, you've got millions of downloads. Even if none of those downloads are not making you any money, like you get to check the box on growth. And so there are things you can do to get that growth by spending money, but sometimes that is not real. And so, and I've heard of companies doing things like, with their millions of dollars, they're hiring a sales team before they have a product to sell, which sounds wacky, except when you have, $10 million of venture capital burning a hole in your pocket, things like that can and do happen. So whether it's just a simple, like, I'm going to buy a list of customers, or I'm going to spend money on Facebook ads, or I'm going to spend money on outside sales, you still want to get the initial product fit before you just go like guns blazing and spend a ton of money on customer acquisition. So that was a lot of information too. Any questions there? Has anyone tried any of these things, or does it make sense? Or you're like, nope, I've done it the opposite way and I've gotten good results. Like, I'm always interested to hear everybody's experiences. Okay. All right. All right.
Wait, hang on. I think Sarah was trying to speak. Do you want to say something?
I was just going to say that I have had some issues with the whole come up with your hypothesis and then test them first, or test them fast. Both. I tend to, when I have an idea, just put it out there and see what happens. And that's not always the best case, because if people, if I haven't planned out how I'm going to ship items or something, and I'm like, yeah, I can figure it out as I go, but a lot of things are a lot harder than I expect them to be. But I don't always know how to test them without just putting it out there and seeing what happens, kind of thing.
Do you have an example of one of those ideas where you were like, I'm going to put the idea out and see what happens?
Yeah, like that was my biggest one, was like figuring out how to ship, was that Squarespace, so I use Squarespace and it had it built into it, and it said, oh, we'll calculate it for you, blah, blah, blah. And then it very much overcharged a customer for shipping. And, I assumed that it would be right because it was a built-in extension. And I had to refund some of that money because the shipping didn't cost me that much. And it just felt really unprofessional. But at the same time, I didn't really know how to test that without going for it,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, acquiring customers is one thing, the systems that support you are another, whether it's your accounting systems, your e-commerce systems. There's a lot of systems in place that's a tough one. Because, for those of you that are doing anything that is, manufacturing, where you're trying to, you've got like parts that you have to source, or, whoever's building the drones. I have to admit, I'm not an expert. I've never done anything in terms of e-commerce or in terms of manufacturing, but I will say, it's just a matter of then working with your provider. You've got to, if they are not responsive to you, if Squarespace is not responsive, we use Stripe. For those, a lot of our customers are, we work with small and large businesses. So with our big customers, the General Mills and the Rabobanks, they're not using Stripe. They're not using credit cards. We are using ACH bank transfers. But with our smaller, farms and whatnot, they're using Stripe. We have our own invoice system, and we had a situation early on where it was double charging customers, and we did not realize it for like a week and a half, which is a lifetime. And one of our customers was very angry that they were charged twice. And so it's really uncomfortable. We actually my CTO could speak to it a little better, but we actually built in a system where it alerts us if anything, if invoicing or payments breaks any of our rules. Did someone pay you more than twice in 30 days? Did it fall outside of a bound of what was expected for this customer? We get an alert so that we can research it, hopefully before the customer notices it. But I'm getting a little bit far from customer acquisition. This is more like ongoing. But yeah, it's hard.
In terms of customer acquisition, I think like the biggest thing is that I have a very niche market. So in order to test it, I can't really test it with just the general public. It's people who want to shop secondhand, or
Yeah.
people who are willing to go outside their comfort zone in terms of their closets. So I put it out there, but it really just, it feels like I'm depending a lot on people just reacting to certain pieces, not,
Yeah.
they can't really request, oh, like I want this in blue,
Yeah.
because I don't have control over that. But,
Right.
I have been doing sort of like, what type of things are you looking for? Jackets or pants or whatever. And that's been helping, but it's, some people say they want something and then you get it for them and then they don't end up buying it. And then so it's, that one is pretty hard to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know, you could tinker with your business model to make sure that, that's, you might say, one path you might say is, well, that is inevitable outcome of my business. There are going to be people that request things and then don't use them.
Yeah.
Is there something in your business model or the way you charge that you could account for that? One thing I've done in the DC area, this was a while ago, but the Georgetown University has a nonprofit that runs out of it, but it runs very much like a business. That it's a language school. It's the Language Academy. They actually charge people. It's free, so you can take courses in like 40 different languages. And what they do is they charge you at the beginning of the semester. It's been a while since I've taken courses there, but let's just call it $300. If you show up to miss no more than like 3 classes in a semester, you get 100% of that money refunded at the end of the semester. If you don't, then they get to keep the money. And so to me, it was an interesting model because they have a mission to provide free language. They're not trying to make money on that, but they also want to minimize people signing up for things that they don't use. So there's a incentive there. So maybe there are ways that you can tinker with your business model to account for those types of things.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. There, I'm really interested. I mean, this was really the end of the formal part of the presentation. So we've got, 20 minutes, 18 minutes just to talk through your own individual. And I'll try to keep my answers concise so that everybody has time. But, consider me a resource or someone else to just kind of real time bounce ideas off of for the next, 20 minutes. And your colleagues will get to hear too, the challenges. Entrepreneurship can be a lonely game sometimes. It's nice to hear what everyone else is trying to struggle with too.
Yeah, I actually just had a quick question. So based on my business model, a lot of styling is done like a la carte. Like if they have a party that night, they book me for like 20 minutes that night. And even though I have acquired a customer and sometimes they'll purchase like a larger package, like it kind of just like ends there. Like I've acquired the customer, I work with them, but like I don't really have a system in place for like keeping them. So I have to do like a lot more acquisition, I feel like, than other service providers. So I was just wondering if you could give me some advice for kind of that level of needing to always have clients and more awareness than like a typical service provider.
Yeah. So that is that's like really a profound question because we make a lot of our money on recurring revenue. You work so hard to get a customer in that, man, when you lose them, it's really hard. So I guess my first question or thought would be, do you want to try to extend the services you offer so that your customers become repeat customers? Or do you want to just always be or are you always the business that is like, all right, I need a huge pipeline because I know I got to get new customers in the door, every week, every day, every week. Do you have a preference? Would you rather continue to work with the same customers or do you want just all new, fresh faces?
I don't really mind either way. If I am new fresh faces, I think like the struggle is like I will have such a like an income that goes like this that I'll never really know if it's going to be a good month or a rough month.
Right.
So it would be nice to kind of have a little bit of both, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in that case, you might think it goes back to the customer problem. They've got an event. Is it that these are the folks that they just have a single event and then they don't? It's the type of customer that has one event a year and that's it. In which case you might look at what types of events need your services and see what are the type of customers that do these things, regularly, monthly, quarterly, weekly, and target some of your messaging and services to that. And there's so many options, it could be, discounts for multiple events. If they're doing more than one, it's per unit, it's more cost efficient to use you 12 times in a year than one. You could turn it into a subscription service, like, hey, for this price, you get this amount of services over a time period.
Yeah.
And then it's on them to come back. And of course, you want them to come back, because if they don't, they're not going to re-sign up for the subscription, but it gives you a little more certainty in terms of your income.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there other things, people that, I'm thinking, I'm definitely not an expert here, but are there other types of ancillary services they need? So the thing they come to you for, and then you can do like add-ons, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. What else? These are all really good. For anyone who's done B2B, like the real estate drones and whatnot, are you partnering with customers already?
Yeah.
That to me seems like a real partnership opportunity.
Yeah. So that's actually I was just about to jump in. I was waiting to see if anyone else had a question. So in terms of partnerships, there's this one franchisee owner called 360 Tour Designs, and they have a variety of different locations across the East Coast. I think it's like in 15 different states. And in each state, they have a subset of people who make these tours for real estate, virtual tours, things like that. So we're kind of, we spoke to them. Well, we had a call scheduled with them last week, but they had to change it. So it's going to be this week. And now we're kind of considering like what the best approach is here, because one of our best case scenario for us is, because they're a franchisee, they would purchase, similar products like this at the scale of like 50 to 75 units. So ideally for us, we can land some kind of deal where, like, if we have a demo and send them some working units, they would get a purchase order of like 50 to 100 units. That'd be really good for us. It's a big sale. But then also, we could work with them as a partner and, maybe kind of set up some kind of service where we allow them to use our products exclusively, or we set up some kind of online subscription-based model service where we host their virtual tours and kind of edit them, or kind of add property or add furniture to them for them. So we're not exactly sure yet, because we haven't, gone on follow-up call there. But I think even realistically, they might be able to like fund us and like give us money to work on developing the product. So so that's kind of what our take is on there. So what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is excellent. You want to ask, I don't know if it's a thing in your business, but, watch for exclusivity. We have a deal with a couple of different data distributors, like the old Thomson Reuters, Refinitiv, Bloomberg, to distribute our data. So they're great partners. We've spent a little money getting lawyers to make sure that they look over the contracts we have with them, so that we retain ownership of our intellectual property. We're open to deals that are exclusive, but man, those are the expensive. Like, you make the customer pay dearly if they want you to be the only, their only dance partner. So, and I will say, we almost made a mistake early on, which was we had this great risk management product for coffee. And one of the big commodities exchanges was like, okay, this sounds perfect. I mean, they stood up a working group, like we had all these meetings. It was very exciting. We put like every little bit of resource we had into this one potential customer. And then about 3 months into it, they went through an acquisition, a corporate reorg, and they were like, we're going to deprioritize this. It's not that we had an exclusive agreement with them. It's just that our little startup was working like 100% on this. And for them, they were like 1% of their resources was put towards it, and their priorities shifted. And we were like, oh my gosh, it could have killed us. Because we just spent probably the better part of, by the time all was said and done, like 6 months only working on that, to the exclusion of developing any other customer. And then they were like, see ya. Wow. So we sort of like, just by the skin of our teeth, like I'd been paying myself a little salary. I like cut my salary, didn't pay myself anything for a while. And we got back on the horse, but it was like a lesson in diverting every bit of resource we had into a single partner.
Yeah, no, that's really, because like honestly, we're similar in terms of that partner that I mentioned, 360 Tour Designs partner. They're kind of our only like big franchisee potential relationship. So I think we should continue to diversify. That kind of leads into another question. So the way we found this specific potential relationship was just through LinkedIn, where we found his profile, and then I just messaged him. I said, hey, I'm into this real estate and stuff, and I want to kind of get some feedback and learn from you. And I think So LinkedIn like kind of works, but it's part of like our bigger sales funnel where we do calls, LinkedIn, website outreach, emails. And one of the things that I was going to ask about is how to like optimize our sales funnel. Because right now, like, you know, we have our LinkedIn channel, and with that, you know, we have like interns like take over my account and then message people with the template and then get on calls with them as themselves, and then they move that forward. But then sometimes, you know, when we message people, they just say, oh yeah, just call me, and then immediately send a phone number and then just expect us for them to call them or us to call them at some point. And then there's also people who have like websites and reach out, contact forms, things like that. So I'm kind of looking for like a good way to organize all of these outbound sales techniques so that we like bring on like this new intern that we're kind of teaching the ropes on right now. I want to be able to just give him, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Next day, do this, you know what I mean? So what's we take there?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question. For those of you that are moving beyond just like an individual customized, because at first we did the same thing. We just, you know, it was very much like ad hoc, you know, we're making some calls. And then we started organizing things into campaigns. We had a sales funnel that we wanted to move people along. And we had multiple people on the team that needed to coordinate. And so at that point we needed CRM, you know, we ended up, oh man, how much time do we have to, I mean, there's so many different CRM systems out there. Eventually the good ones all get bought by Salesforce. Like we were using Salesforce or Relate IQ, and then it got acquired by Salesforce. Like I can't remember, there were two systems we used, both got acquired by Salesforce. And so we found ourselves at Salesforce no matter what we tried. But yeah, I mean, this now just becomes making time as you as the founder or whoever's, you know, handling your sales to sit down and kind of review different features and figure out which ones meet your needs, or if it's a combination of several things. Like we use Intercom to handle chat and messaging off of our site. It integrates with Salesforce really well. And it also, you know, integrates with we use 8x8 for our phones, which also can tie into Salesforce. So that type of system is just, you know, then it's just like a technology play to make sure everybody's, you know, coordinating and whatnot. But as far as like how you campaign, you know, it depends. Early on, you don't necessarily want to send out a mass campaign via LinkedIn or Facebook or any other way, or, you know, use any other sort of, you know, messaging system, because you haven't gotten your product market fit, quote, right yet. So, you know, you figure out the customer, you figure out the value proposition, then you scale. That's at least that's the normal way it goes. But once you're like, you know what, we got this product, we know it, we've gotten the cost down, we know the value proposition, we know who wants it, then of course those things are really good for targeting, because you can, with precision, you can target, okay, I know I want to talk to, you know, farmers in the Mideast who are growing, you know, cherries, or in the Midwest who are growing cherries. Then LinkedIn and Facebook are really great for paring down and then getting the message out to those folks in an automated way.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think I have a little bit of pushback there actually with having a like quote unquote product market fit before doing the larger scale. I mean, I think with us, we have a better idea of product market fit at this stage, because just a quick explanation, our drone is autonomously flies through a home to make a virtual tour. Specifically, like when you go on Zillow or when you go online to find homes, and you get to click through each room and like twist them around and look in 360.
Right. So
the goal is for our drone to autonomously make one of those, and it's really difficult to make that. And, you know, just at this point, we've already like built a drone that does 360, and now we're kind of focused on the navigation aspect of it.
Yeah.
So speaking to people, they're all like, wow, this will make my life so much easier. Yeah. We want to do this. And because of that, we realized that it makes sense to kind of just start blasting people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, sure. And if you've already got, you know, product market fit is always like, do you have your costs down as low as they can be? You know, do you know what you want to charge for? Can you charge more? Should you be charging, you know, do you want to own the technology and lease it out, or do you sell the whole thing? You know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, you learn things as you go along. And so if you have like 1 million customers, you know, 1 million people buy you're about to see my 4-year-old son, everyone, come here, 3.5-year-old son. So product market fit is, you know, being solid in your value proposition, but also it's about, solid in your business model too. And you want to give yourself room to adjust that if you need to. So if you have 1 million customers and you've committed to like, we're going to own this technology and, we own the drone and we will lease them to you, then you blast it out. And is that what 2 years from now, is that what you want to do? I mean, not that business models are set in stone, you can always change, but there's a cost to doing that. So that's why I say like, give yourself room to evolve. You could be that rare entrepreneur that you go in day one, you expected to execute this, you knew what your costs were, and by gosh, it happened. My husband is like that. He says something and then I'm like, how is it 5 years later that it was like this precisely? Most of us, I am not like that. There are things, Mercaris has never pivoted from our business mission. However, our cost structure, the product mix that we have, the number, the customers, the unexpected customers that we, have acquired over the years, none of that we could have predicted. And it's nice to be able to test the case and then grow, test and grow, test and grow. So, yeah. But if you're ready, do it. Then there's no reason to like, wait, go for it. Yeah. Any and all, everything you've got money for. Track it so that like when we spend $1 on LinkedIn, it returns us $5. So this is where we're going to press the gas versus when we spend $1, over here on Twitter, the return is $2. So we're going to do more of what makes us more money. So that was the only thing I would say is then just track your metrics really well so you know where you're getting the biggest bang for your buck.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Others?
We got time for one more question.
Okay. And Sarah, I'll just make this kind of an open, Sarah's got my contact information. So I know that you guys are going through a program for a number of weeks. If there are things that come up, either in terms of like, ag, if you're doing sourcing for energy bars, for example, I might be able to go outside of just customer acquisition and talk about some of the procurement practices and whatnot that I've seen, some of our customers have attested to. Or any other questions, but just, I'll have my my contact information for Sarah and she'll probably, maybe quarterback it a little bit. But if you think of questions after this or, even, when as you work your way through the program, let me know. So.
Yes, happy to do that. Thank you, Kellee.
All right.
Well,
Well, good work, everyone. I love, I will be really interested to hear updates or how the program went for you. And I know this is like a really new format for having these types of what are usually in-depth in-person discussions. And I know we'll all get better at this with time, but I'm really interested to hear feedback after this is over and just, how the program works overall. So.
Thank you so much for coming in and talking today, Kellee. This was, I think, I found it very interesting, informative. I think they did too. So really appreciate you making the time.
Yes, thank you, Kellee.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.